Uranium Energy Corp, one of only 12 uranium producers in the world. UEC trades on the New York Stock Exchange. They have more than doubled their in-ground uranium resource over the past 2 years. They've also become one of only 6 uranium producers in the United States. Led by Amir Adnani, who has been ranked as one of the top resource CEOs by Casey Research, Amir has attracted major investors like Rick Rule of Sprott Asset Management, Li Ka-shing, the richest man in Asia, and institutions such as Vanguard and BlackRock. Learn more about Uranium Energy Corp at uraniumenergy.com or by calling 866-748-1030. Greetings and thank you for joining us at FutureMoneyTrends.com. I'm here with one of the keynote speakers at the Casey Research Conference, the Casey Summit in San Antonio. Remember the Alamo. Of course, all the resource investors know exactly that feeling right now. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good to have you talk to me.
Yeah, no, it's always great talking to you. The audience seems to really enjoy our talks because mainly you go after the big picture stuff and kind of share your thoughts, which you're the chief economist for Casey Research, so we're really grateful to have you. What is your talk kind of about today? What are you focused on? Before the interview, we were talking a little bit about Russia, and that's a really big deal. That is on everybody's minds with the Russia and the U.S. Is there a new Colder War coming? I think that's actually a ripoff from Katusha's new book, right? The Colder War. So is there a new Colder War coming?
Well, we're in it, in the sense that I believe that wars are increasing and will have much more effect on world economies than the traditional things that traditional economists, like I often claim to be, focus on. You can argue whether you're a Keynesian or a monetarist or an Austrian economist, whether the money supply, the debt, or the government spending are the issues that drive things. I say the geopolitical situation, meaning wars, demographics, ethnicity, will dominate the future for what affects our culture. And so I say that what we should be looking at in particular are the increases in world conflicts, particularly Ukraine, also this ISIS operation that has made Obama announce a new war in Iraq, the fourth in 4 presidents, plus difficulties in Africa and the Gaza area. When you add them up, there's problems of all kinds that are more of the geopolitical class than whether or not Janet Yellen is going to tweak a word in an announcement about the Fed's expectations for our economy. I think we need to be much more concerned about these difficulties, and I'd be happy to talk about each one, but let me try an angle on you. The angle that I'm worried about is that we, the United States, have been more responsible than we realize for the results of what's happening, of the increased conflict in the world.
You know, a lot of people feel that the U.S. is the good guys out there, but I mean, this is now our 3rd time in Iraq.
4th time.
Is it our 4th time? Well,
George Bush Sr., Clinton, George Bush Jr., and now Obama.
We're there so much, I forgot. So yeah, I mean,
is anybody learning? Are we getting tired of this? I'm sure they are.
Yeah. I'd like to focus more on what's going on with Russia and the United States, specifically what's going on in Ukraine recently, and just this new relationship, I guess not a new relationship, but certainly a renewed relationship between China and Russia, almost like a bloc versus the U.S.
I'm sure you've read the news of what's happening in Ukraine in the sense of conflicts that seem to have arisen spontaneously by the revolutionary desire for freedom of the Ukrainians. But a little peel back the cover says the U.S. spent $5 billion from the National Endowment for Democracy to fund revolutionary thinking within Ukraine and to foment the potential for having relationships held more closely with Europe than with Russia. To some extent, that's not a problem. But if we're going to put missiles into Ukraine pointed at Russia, Russia, who has been seeing NATO creep towards it over the last decade since 1949 when the NATO was created, they just put their stake in the ground and said no more. So this isn't really a battle about Ukraine, it's between Russia and the US. And we've escalated it by creating sanctions against Russia and what they can do with their businesses, and most specifically their energy business. Russia has responded in a way that's pretty clever, in a financial way, to turn to their neighbor to the south who needs resources. Russia is the biggest country in the world with the resources. So combining a resource-rich country with a people and resource demand country is obviously a marriage that makes sense. $400 billion deal was signed between Putin and Xi Jinping to have China buy 20% of its natural gas from Russia over the next decade and build one of the largest pipelines ever built, and for Russia to pick up the credit card facilities from China because Visa and MasterCard were being sanctioned, and for the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, a formal organization to build an international bank, BRICS Development Bank, whose stated purpose is to provide development, but I think whose hidden purpose is to facilitate trade not using the dollar, trading renminbi for products or rubles for products.
Yeah, I think that's the big news here, is that they're not using the U.S. dollar. I mean, long term, how does this affect the petrodollar, since Russia's now doing transactions outside of the dollar, specifically with China?
The petrodollar arose in 1974 after the Middle East crisis, where they had used oil as a weapon. What became obvious is that that was dangerous for the world. Kissinger negotiated with Saudi Arabia and then eventually all the oil republics to only accept dollars for oil. Now that was a two-edged sword. Oil exporters became unbelievably wealthy. We offered, particularly to the Saudis, defense and support of their country. And the dollar got an anchor because it had been ripped off of its value when we went off the gold standard in '71. It has worked for 40 years. But as other countries, Russia had taken dollars for its energy sales, but has now negotiated deals with a number of its customers in rubles and in renminbi, and China itself has been advocating bilateral trade agreements with about 30 other countries where the trades are satisfied by swap agreements in their own currencies, not the dollar. That decreases the special privilege that we as an empire of the United States built our wealth on, that special status being the reserve status of the dollar. That reserve status was built on the petrodollar, which I just described, that oil had to be bought with dollars. That created a demand for the dollar. It allowed us to run huge trade deficits because we could print money to buy oil, and huge government deficits because we were running the trade deficits and foreigners used the dollars they gained to reinvest in our government debt. Our government debt is half owned by foreigners. There is something like $15 trillion of denominated deposits of various sorts that are all dollars, that if people lost confidence in holding things denominated in dollars, could go another way. In other words, the effects of a major loss of the position of the dollar could be a financial catastrophe. I started with a political war catastrophe. The two could come together. That would be very difficult.
It appears that a dollar collapse is inevitable, but it also looks like the stage is being set slowly. There is not going to be an overnight dollar collapse until the night of. You know what I mean? But it's not imminent. It seems like
that's a fair evaluation, because in fact the dollar has been increasing recently due to all the small conflicts, would have made people have less confidence in their alternatives, and the dollar has traditionally been the reserve currency and a flight to safety. I expect at some point there'll be gold as the flight to safety, and both the Russians and the Chinese have bought lots of gold over the last few years, and I think they know what's going to happen better than the rest of the world.
You think the U.S. will do something desperate, like go to war with Iran, in order to save the dollar? Because typically the dollar rallies in times of crisis, a war. You would think that the United States would want to protect its interest in the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency. Would they do something like go to war? I don't think with Russia, but perhaps with Iran.
It's an excellent question, but we're already at war with Iran. It's hard to say who started what when. If you go back to Kermit Roosevelt deposing the elected leader Mossadegh, which created the many political things back and forth between us. But sanctions are a form of war, and we have very serious sanctions on Iran. Some claim that happened because they were ready to take non-dollar for their oil. Now we've told them they can't use our banks or dollars for oil. So in a sense, what's happening is they are also being driven away from us and away from the dollar.
Yeah, it's kind of foolish of us because now we're forcing these countries to go to alternatives, especially Russia.
Shooting ourselves in the foot by all these sanctions on Iran and Russia specifically as very large oil resources in the world, and saying you can't use dollars. I think that the people who are doing it don't realize how much damage it is in the long term for the regime that has held very well for 40 years.
So take us to the next conflict of war. You mentioned ISIS. How is that shaping out in the Middle East? Essentially, it's the new Al-Qaeda, only this one's 10 times as powerful.
The serious problem there is that we help foment the forerunners of that organization. As Libyan freedom fighters were taken out of Libya through Turkey's borders into becoming revolutionaries within Syria. It's out of that group that the ISIS group grew.
We'll be okay. The mics will, surprisingly, the mics pick us up and drown everything else out.
We probably helped train some of the people that are in ISIS.
There's a picture of McCain with one of the leaders.
It looks like al-Baghdadi in the background of one picture that's on his own Twitter website. If it really is Baghdadi, I don't think that's doing McCain any good. It might not be. We don't know. But the point of that set of conflicts is the most recent decision by the government is to spend $500 million on training 5,000 rebels to go fight their brothers, the other ISIS members that were supposed to be the moderate, and I don't know how you identify it, the moderate rebels, moderate fundamentalists, and at the same time those 5,000 guys are supposed to fight Assad. And by the way, ISIS has something like 31,000. This is a program that is guaranteed to fail, in my view. And then the question is what? Obviously more escalation. Let me say something that I think is a shift here you may not focus on easily. I take a position that we should advocate peace. We've been at it long enough in the Middle East. We've spent enough money. We've got enough people maimed, hurt, damaged, post-traumatic syndrome. We need to bring troops home. We need to find ways to cooperate. We need to provide help for people rather than more wars. That would be what I would advocate. And it's quite a shift when you consider where we've been.
It is, and unfortunately, as soon as the war drums beat, I mean, Americans pretty much fall in line with their president, and especially if there was an attack, which now we're not getting the attacks, but we're being told imminent attacks, something can happen in New York, something can happen on the 9/11 anniversary, and it makes people willing, especially with these decapitations going on. That's only going to stir Americans and Westerners up. I mean, now you have France bombing Iraq. France didn't even participate in the last one, the last round of war with Iraq. So it seems like it's really what your message is great, and I'm sure most people agree with you, but it's really hard because Americans have been conditioned that we are the good guys, we're the police, wouldn't you say?
I think you got a good insight on that. And it's a bit of a problem, but I just, maybe as a side and plug for you, that we're far much too shaped by our mainstream media, and you're a member of your own independent view of what's going on in the world. Interviewing somebody like me with an independent view, I think, is the way that more people would wake up to some of the things we talked about, like John McCain having a picture on his website of potentially serious Islamic fundamentalist, potentially terrorists, seems like a strange thing, but wouldn't be reported in the mainstream. You brought it up. Yeah. And I think we'll do better if more people look on a wider scale for other sources to find out what's going on.
We need to wrap it up, but I want to just kind of close off when you speak, or when you've already spoken, correct?
I spoke.
Okay. What is the message you wanted to leave the audience with as far as when they come out here?
One of my messages that has gotten quite a bit of fun was that after I said I've had enough of war, I want to advocate peace, rather than saying leave it, which is what many people have said, leave the country if you don't agree with it, I want to say I'm going to stay here. My reason is that I have children and grandchildren. I showed some pictures, some very cute, I'm not biased or anything, grandkids, to say we should advocate peace for our kids and for our grandkids. And I hope that that's a message that has some amount of heartthrob. It certainly does for me, and it is a reason that I think we should work to make a change away from more war to more peace.
That's a great message. Bud, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.